Hello, everybody, and welcome again to the Risk Matrix, hosted by James Junkin
Roll Tide
and myself, Dr. Martin. And we're here supported by Veriforce. We've got a great guest today, and we'll be talking about some procurement, AI, and a lot of things that are a little bit above how I operate. But I think our guest is going to tell us how things work. So today, James, if you'll allow me, before we introduce our guest, Veriforce powers us, but we're supported today by Trinity Endeavors. Trinity Endeavors is an industrial supply company that prioritizes safety, transparency, and solutions. Located in Stanley, North Dakota, Trinity Endeavors maintains the highest standards of quality and service by combining experience and the latest manufacturing technologies available, servicing accounts nationwide on products including PPE, gaskets, fasteners, and high-quality four-way gas monitors. Veriforce Networks can save 15% off the price of the PM400 series gas monitor for worker protection in hazardous atmospheres. To learn more about this offer, visit veriforcenetwork.com/offers/Trinity-Endeavors. And there you go. And James, if you would, could you welcome our guest?
Yes, welcome Alan Rice to the Risk Matrix. You're in the Risk Matrix, baby. Alan is one of our members of our Strategic Advisory Board. He is a distinguished procurement executive with over 25 years of global experience in procurement, strategic sourcing, and supply chain management. He is an expert in procurement technologies, including newer cognitive AI solutions that have revolutionized the procurement process today. He's known for challenging norms and delivering exceptional results, and has managed billions of dollars in spend worldwide. His expertise was honed at a series of Fortune 500 global companies where he led large transformation and modernization projects, and he is the managing director of Cache Procurement. Welcome, Alan.
Welcome, Alan.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Dr. Martin. Appreciate it. I'm thrilled to be here. It's exciting times now with all of the technological changes that are basically kind of flooding the market. I often say we're living through a revolution, not an evolution. And you read a lot about this in the news, but most of the folks that have been closer to it in the tech sector, they talk about it being as important as the Industrial Revolution. And I'm kind of aligned with that concept, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So, my experience, there are procurement and supply chains is an interesting field, because when you talk about it, it's an area that kind of cuts across all of the different areas within an enterprise. So, I mean, if you're in a company and you're in sales, your perception of the company is basically from the sales group, right? And you don't normally kind of have interactions. But procurement and supply chain tends to cut across the entire company because they're managing the costs. And as such, you're dealing with finance, you're dealing with sales, you're dealing with R&D, marketing. So you're a horizontal organization with, servicing all the vertical silos or departments. So having said that, it's an area that is and will be impacted pretty significantly with these newer generative AI technologies.
It's conference season, and by the time this episode airs, we will have come back from the American Society of Safety Professionals conference in Denver. And then the National Safety Council has its conference in Orlando in September. And there'll be multiple sessions there about AI. And everyone in occupational safety and health that I talk to, and some procurement specialists that I talk to, are super interested in AI. But There's also some reluctance, because there are a lot of things that we don't know about AI that we wish we knew. And we kind of get into the old way of doing things. And while this is kind of some see it as a novelty item, there's a fear factor there. We don't really understand it. So we kind of fall back into the practices of old, and maybe losing a competitive advantage in the marketplace, number one. And number two, may miss out on the opportunity to make workplaces safer for workers. So I'd just like to throw this out to you. If you're just thinking about AI, let's talk about what AI is and what it's not.
Right. So AI, or the term, has been around for a very long time. It's probably, I think it was coined back in the 50s. And it's, there's been a lot of tech that uses AI, artificial intelligence, in the background, machine learning. It does exactly what it sounds like, right? It's the more you use it, the more information you feed it, the more the tool learns. What is new and what has everybody talking is generative AI. And what that does, and so it kind of exploded in the market in December of 22 when OpenAI released their ChatGPT 3.5, I believe, right?
Yep.
So before that, you had to be in one of these tech companies like OpenAI or Microsoft or Google to have ever even seen or played with it because it wasn't for public consumption. But then they released it and it blew everybody's mind. Why? Because it was a chat bot that felt like you were communicating with another human being, because it could understand how you speak and respond accordingly. And what happened after that was various iterations of evolution. So over the last 18 or 19 months, it's just been a whirlwind of evolution, or excuse me, revolution in this space, because these generative AIs learn incredibly quickly. So what it is a generative AI can look at information, mostly text, and answer your question. It will use a thought process, neural networking, very similar to how the brain works, to look at information and then come up with an answer. And it will give you what it considers the most statistical probable response to your question. Well, by doing it that way and doing it as fast as it does it, it feels like you're talking to another human being. So it could be as simple as, I'll consider, for example, in a business, and you give this generative AI a copy of a contract and you ask it a question. All right. Does the force majeure clause in this contract align with our needs as a company? And it'll read it instantly, come back to you and say yes, no, recommend changes, edits. And that is what the generative AI is. So it has the ability to do that. Get using it and what it can use for stories, right?
Right. Well,
You
we all
hear
watch
how,
those movies, right? The crazy
right,
movies that they have out, and it's like, oh, the Terminator, right? That's
right?
the Hallmark movie of like the machines taking over, and that's
Skynet, Matrix, you name it,
yeah.
Well,
right? So, futurists were always ahead of their time, right? When they're talking about AI and what it can do. And there were a lot of attempts over the years to try to build things that that kind of fit that model, because you've got you've got an area of technology that's fast moving on what's called quantum computing. You've got another area which is robotics, and you've got the other area which is AI. But they're all going to converge at some point in time. Where you're seeing that happen faster is between AI and robotics. That's where we're going to start seeing things move a little quicker.
so,
Go ahead.
I reached out to a client to talk about AI solutions in the area of occupational safety and health, probably about a month ago. And they said, well, we tried it 3 years ago and we didn't have a lot of success with it. We still had to have human beings come in and check. How much has technology evolved in generative AI from learning from 3 years ago to today?
The evolution has been astronomical. It's like one day I was trying to explain to my son the difference, how fast this is moving. And I asked him the question. I said, just to bring it into a concept that he could understand, I said, how many iPhones come out per year? And he looked at me like I was crazy, and he said, one, of course. I said, so now tell me how many versions or evolutions of AI are coming out per year? And he looked at me and said, one. I said, no, at least four. So that gives you an idea how fast it's moving. 3 years ago is more than a dozen evolutions of tech since then. So 3 years ago, you did not have a ChatGPT generative AI out there. You had some interesting chatbots that could do a certain amount of stuff based off of a playbook or a list, but it couldn't have a conversation with you where you could ask it pretty much anything. So the thing that really changed these generative AIs was something called large language models. And what they are is huge databases of information. And so they feed it to this generative AI. And that's what gives it its knowledge, right? So companies like Google and Microsoft and OpenAI, they created these huge models. And that's why you can talk to these AIs and they kind of feel real. So 3 years ago, the tech wasn't there. 3 years ago would have felt like, 1 or 2 decades in tech. Tech up until this generative AI evolution, if you're at a company and you were an IT department, you knew that the technology cycle was 3 to 5 years. And that's how they invested their money, right? They needed before they even considered looking at new. That's been thrown on its head. 3 to 5 years is way too long. So when you look at a lot of reports that are out there from most of the large consulting or research or investigations or universities, they all tell you that we're going to see very significant changes over the next 2 to 3 years in all aspects of life, business and personal. So when you say, what can I do with it, right? So let's start with a personal, right? So let's say you're looking for a job. You can go to one of these AIs like OpenAI. You can take the job description that you're looking at and that you're interested. You can load it. Then you can load your resume. And then you can tell the AI to adapt your resume to that job description. And in about 30 seconds, it will rewrite your resume based on the job description, right? Amazing. So that speeds up your job search and it increases your probabilities that you may actually get a callback. So that kind of fits what's called the model of augment, right? There's two areas of generative AI where you're augmenting your work, consider it like a co-pilot, or the other area, which is automate, where you're basically having the AI take over a task and doing it for you. Right now, where you see a lot is in the augment, and that's where it's going to impact. It's going to make everybody a lot more productive. You'll be able to do things a lot faster. So in my career field, in strategic sourcing, you do requests for proposals when you're trying to contract a new vendor, a new supplier. Well, to write one of those things, it takes time, especially if it's net new and if it's for something you've never done before. You could take days or even weeks to write a proper RFP. But in today's world, if I use an AI to augment that work, I can have a discussion with the AI, tell it what I need. I need to generate an RFP for the following subject that does this, does that, covers this geography, that geography. Once I've answered all its questions, and it may ask me questions, it'll say, I'm ready to generate, and it will write an RFP. So something that might have taken me a week to do, I do in about 30 minutes, if that much, probably less.
Can I ask you a question related to that? I mean, you talk about loading information into the generative AI, right?
Mhm.
And as a researcher, right, I look at a bunch of different things in order to make an opinion or a statement about something. What kind of discernment does the AI have for competing information? right? So you're asking for an RFP for something XYZ, you're giving it some constraints, but at some point it's got to have some decision-making capabilities about what's right and what's wrong.
Right.
Let's talk about that.
So there's a thing called prompt engineering, and it's a fancy word for how you structure the question, right? So it's important how you structure the question. If I structure it in such a way, what it'll come back with, it will come back with those competing points of view.
Okay.
It will say, the general consensus is X. So-and-so says this, so-and-so says this, so-and-so says that. And I can be very granular. I can ask it to give me the citations as well, and it will give me the citations. But my next question might be, what's the synthesis of all of that? Is it leaning in one direction or another? So that's where it's helping me, right? It's not because we'd all like to be able to read everything we get our hands on, but you can't read every multi-hundred page report out there on a subject as much as you would like. But you can, I say, consider it a really smart assistant. So if you're a lawyer, it becomes a paralegal for you. If you're a writer, right, it becomes an assistant in that aspect, or even an editor. Because what generative AI does really well is anything related to language. It kind of it's still struggling with math. And they're trying to fix that. And what I mean by math is, if I give it a word problem, that's a word math problem, it's probably only going to get it right about 60% of the time.
Interesting.
Yeah, so
I think it would be the opposite.
Right.
You think that is because you have to go to specialty solutions that do use things like machine learning and that are built for math problems. So the way these generative AIs today have bridged that gap, they're able to get outside, let's say, of their space, meaning they can go to the internet or anywhere else you tell them to go and get the information. So what they'll do now is, since they know the generative AI is not good with that, there may be what's a plugin or a connection to one of these specialized calculators that will go out and ask that question for you and come back with the answer. So it's not that the generative AI created the answer, it's that it knew where to go and get it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I guess my next question would be, are there flaws that come in, and do the flaws come in from the user, right?
Right.
The asking the question, I think you alluded to that, and the information that's input, right? I guess, where is the information coming, and who's feeding it? Because I would think that sways how
Right.
the bot responds.
So you're correct. Part of it has to do with how you structure the question, right? How you engineer the prompt. So the AI, you could ask the same question, slightly different structure, and it could potentially come back with completely different answers. So there's a learning curve. So that's the first thing that most folks have to do, is kind of learn how to do those prompts. Good news there is it's actually kind of easy, because you can sit in front of any AI and say, teach me to write prompts. And it will say, okay, first you need to do this, then you need to do that, then, so it's your own professor. It's literally amazing. So that's why I say things are changing. It's not that you have to go somewhere and get a certification on how to do prompt engineering. There are studies out there that say it takes about 10 hours roughly of hands-on work with an AI to get comfortable with it and start being able to use it at a decent level, if you want to call it that. That's amazing. It's literally nothing of time. It's just putz around with the tool.
So
Now,
let's say I was interested in maybe integrating AI into whatever business function that I have. There's a lot of different AI tools out there. Is
Yeah.
it important to do research and to determine which tool best meets your needs, or all of them pretty much basically the same thing? But maybe
No, they're not. They're all totally different, right? So AI is a buzzword out there, and obviously solution providers are all using the word AI. But the question is, if what you're interested in is generative AI, and you have to ask them, what part of your solution is a generative AI? The common term that seems to be floating to the top is co-pilot. Do you have a co-pilot?
right.
Right? And what that means is you can just ask it a question as if it was a human being. How do I do this? Where is that? You know, can you create this for me? Can you go to the internet and find the answer to this question for me? So it's literally having an assistant, right? That doesn't mean that there won't be in a solution provider's mix and how they generate the solution, you know, some machine learning, neural networking, deep thinking, all of the other components related to AI. So what I've seen is that most of the solutions for now are point solutions. They're AIs that solve a problem. So let's say you're looking for something that can identify and track risk, and you're going to find an AI solution that was built for that task. And to the question of, you know, how does it get it, or where does it get its information? It goes back to what I mentioned before, the LLMs, the large language models. So it depends on what large language model it is getting its information from. But it's also going to get information from whatever you upload to it or wherever you tell it to go. So I may ask it a question, and in the prompt, I may say, additionally, go online, research the topic, and come back to me with my answer. So I can tell it to either answer with its own knowledge, which means its own large language model, or I can tell it to go to the internet, or I can even tag it to go to something very specific. So it's really, again, it gets back to what you're asking it to do.
So
I know we're kind of going down a wormhole. I want to ask one more question if I can.
Sure.
Large language models, right? You're talking about which large language models. Does this mean that like Google has a large language model and Meta has a large language model? Okay. So I guess then, you know, we're in competition, right? Who has the best large language model, and what is the benefit of linking those large language models? And would that ever happen?
It's a conversation that's going on. You know, they're feeding these AIs insane amounts of data, but they're coming up across, and I'm sure you've seen this in the news, they come across issues, for example, of copyright.
Yep.
Right? You fed a book to this AI, but you don't have the right to do that. So laws and regulations haven't caught up to this tech. So I feel that there's still some areas we're going to have to see change. Now, regulations around AI or newer laws around AI sadly tend to occur first in Europe, and then the US adopts, right? So
Not surprised.
in regulating AI than in the US. And I suspect that's what will happen. Those LLMs, there are some that are task specific. There are LLMs, for example, that were built for lawyers in the contracting space, because the language that's used in those LLMs would be legal language. So those are kind of LLMs for a particular task. Clearly, one of the biggest ones out there is OpenAI's, but Google has its own. But again, we get back to the whole issue of proprietary information. So at some point, yes, you know, the appetite for information for these AIs will exceed the capability of keeping those LLMs separate.
Yeah,
Now, what's going to happen after that, I don't know.
Oh,
You know,
it's Armageddon, right?
yes,
Armageddon.
I did, right?
I'll let James jump in here. I'll stop asking this kind of wormhole
AI is
questions.
going to generative AI will eventually rule the world. So let's say I understand the model that we're searching the internet and the source of knowledge for a lot of things to gather the information we need in the generative AI. If I said I want it to create me a specific policy, HR policy, safety policy, it's probably able to do that. But what if I needed to feed it company specific information? Like I need to get my information into the AI application. How would that work?
Yeah, I mean, it's like any other solution. You're just uploading data, but I think your question goes a little further and it's about security, right? So that's the big problem the big companies have right now. They fear giving their intellectual property away. So the initial iterations of these generative AIs, they were on open platforms, right? So there've been a few scares with some companies where they release their intellectual property into the tool, in the sense that everything you ask it becomes part of the tool, right? So every bit of information. So if I say, hey, I do the following thing in my manufacturing process, how can I do it better? You just told an AI your trade secret. Now, what happened is most of these AI solution providers have an enterprise version that can be set up to function behind your firewall. So that issue's already been addressed. It was a bigger problem about a year ago. But now, for example, OpenAI has a version of ChatGPT that as an enterprise you would contract to function behind your firewall. I know many companies that have already started to do that. So
is that the difference between supervised AI and unsupervised AI?
No, not necessarily. That's just how the information flows. The supervised versus unsupervised kind of gets back to what I said about automation.
Okay.
Are you allowing the AI to make a decision and take an action without supervision? I like to say, use the example of a Tesla. Yeah, Tesla can do self-driving, but they still kind of require you to hold the wheel, right? Technically, it could drive without you holding the wheel, 100%. But we're not at a position where people are comfortable, or is the company comfortable with the idea of the car being 100% autonomous on the highway without the driver having their hands on the wheel. So that's the safety net. So I think we'll continue to see supervised for a while longer, but I think the shift will occur very rapidly at some point where, as companies and individuals get comfortable with the AI, they see that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing most of the time, that they'll start letting go of the wheel.
Who's supervising though? I guess that's my question, right? Like who qualifies as a supervisor? Because like Dr. Martin could go on there and I start asking it a bunch of crazy questions and uploading a bunch of crazy stuff. Am I considered a supervisor because I'm a guardian of that information that I'm putting in there, or who's supervising? The head of Meta, the head of Google?
Now, the supervision is for a task, not necessarily for you being a user of it. Meaning, if you were going in there and asking it to do a task, right? I want you to issue a purchase order for $1 million for something. Mm-hmm. Do you want the AI to just do it off of your word? Or do you want someone to supervise and, let's call it, approve that that occurs and that the purchase order is correct, it's valid, you're authorized, there's budget, all of those things. That's where a supervisor would come in, not when you're interacting with it and using it as an augmentation for research. But if you ask it to take a task, let's say you're doing research, but now you're asking it to publish something. At that point, you may have a supervisor.
This is a dangerous conversation here. I mean, I would love to publish more. So,
it will help you, that's actually a great point. It will help you as a writer to be able to write better, write faster, less mistakes. It does function as a copywriter, as a copy editor. You can feed your entire book and have it read it and come back with recommendations. You can, and at that point, you're the supervisor because it comes back with recommendations and you agree or disagree. So think of it like a spell check on steroids. Only the only difference is it it really does come back with some interesting stuff. And
Trust but
you
verify.
ask, yeah, trust but
Trust
verify.
but
You can
verify.
also ask it to, to check it for plagiarism. There are some very good AIs out there from a writer's perspective that will read your entire article and do a plagiarism check on you. Right?
Well, we
And
know that firsthand, don't we, James?
We do.
Uh,
We do. We do. We do.
James is a doctoral student and I'm a professor, and we use some of those powerful AIs to check our work and they are very spot on, down to the specific detail of where things originated and when and how and who and what they were submitted for, which is outstanding.
yeah,
Especially
so
in the academic space.
that's a great use case. I mean, I'm seeing a lot in the academic space. I think, there's some higher eds are pushing back on AI. Other higher eds are embracing it and building it into their curriculums. Honestly, as they should. The genie's out of the bottle, and you trying to avoid using it isn't going to really help. So embrace it, let the students use it, but adapt how you teach, how you test knowledge.
How
It's
you
very
mentor, how it's
comparable to when,
used,
right. It's
right?
very comparable to when the calculator came out, right?
The graphing
Uh,
calculator. That was
yep,
my high school, the graphing calculator, and it was like, you're cheating, right? But really, it just made it more efficient for us to do our work.
it's a great analogy. This tech is that, there's a little pushback in the beginning. People are uncomfortable with it, don't know how to use it. But there are tools out there now that will facilitate a professor's job. So for example, when you need to create a quiz or an exam, you can go to tools that says, read all of the material, generate an exam for me. And it will do it in a few seconds. So what's your time worth as a professor to be able to do stuff in minutes that took you days and hours?
You just cut my workload down by a lot. So,
Yeah, there's
Well,
some
so
other
let
areas. Go ahead.
I just wanted to kind of shift the conversation a little bit towards risk and health and safety and where AI is being used right now. Like where do you see it kind of blossoming into this risk and safety space?
It's relatively new. A lot of these risk tools that exist out there, like third-party supplier risk tools and things like that, they're initiating um, newer AI functionalities. That's an area that's still relatively new. I haven't seen a lot yet. As I said before, there's some areas that are kind of ripe, like legal, right, that are moving very quickly. Marketing, very quickly. Risk is a little more complicated, and you are asking, for example, an AI to give you a recommendation,
Yeah.
right? So
Your inputs have to be spot on to get a
your inputs have
recommendation
to
on
be
risk.
exactly, exactly. So, having, how do I want to put this? There are some tools out there that were built for purpose to identify risk. Maybe this is not a good example, but actually in the defense industry, right? So the current conflict in Gaza, they are using AIs to identify targets and identify risks, manage those risks. There's still a human in the loop,
Yeah.
but they're using a new tool. I don't remember the name of
That's
it.
fascinating. Fascinating.
Yeah, so the thing is, they literally have an instant calculation about whether A, they should attack that target, and B, what damage and or collateral damage could occur from that decision. And then a human makes that decision, let's say go, no go.
Right.
So defense industry is pretty far ahead in that risk area. I'm not familiar with all the other tools out there that may be working. Some of the bigger providers, bigger solution providers out there are already working on it. I just haven't seen all their tools.
So I can think of several applications for generative AI in the occupational safety and health space. For example, if I feed it hazards, perhaps it can give me recommended controls for those hazards based on,
Yes, that is correct.
is out there.
As
And what,
long as the data's in there, right? As long as the
Right.
information is in there.
where,
Yeah.
so from a language model standpoint, I think there are a lot of applications in occupational safety and health. Where I wonder is moving from the language models that we've been talking about, generating policies, maybe giving us some recommendations, crafting procedures, legal documents, things of that nature. Have we come far enough to where we can incorporate video, like live video, of workers working and determining at-risk behaviors based on their actions?
There's already solutions out there that do exactly that. I've just seen some, some examples, some videos of it, but yes, you've identified what is a risky action. There is a video, let's say on the shop floor or at the platform, and it identifies a worker doing something. Let's say that worker is walking around without a safety helmet on. It would immediately flag that, and however you've programmed it. So I personally haven't used them, but I've seen videos of tech that's already out there for it. So
And
it's
they
there.
have that, one of the things that I've seen, James and Alan, is, for example, forklift movement. There's a lot of, in the warehousing space, there's a lot of AI that goes into hazards and risks of cameras following movement within the warehouse environment and identifying risky behaviors and stopping it at, giving information to a human user to stop this or intervene or etc. And I
Yeah.
think that, some of the bigger warehousing people are doing that kind of AI, and it's unique. It's cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's the direction we're going. It's also kind of scary, right? Because if you set an AI up to manage risk through a video camera, then you're being watched every second of your work shift.
Workers don't like that,
No.
right?
I don't
They
think
don't.
anybody likes to be watched.
And that's that gets into privacy concerns. It gets into, it maybe
Where I was
even,
going.
go down the wormhole of HIPAA if there's medical things that it's looking for. So, I can see a lot of benefits and I can see a lot of drawbacks. And I agree with you that I think we are so far behind in regulating, but our desire to go farther and farther and farther with this tool is, I don't know. I think that's a major drawback that really needs to be regulated in some way. And forgive me for saying that because I know a lot of people don't like more regulations, but when you have something as powerful as this that is just getting reiterated every day and growing, there needs to be a council or something that's kind of reviewing how this is progressing, because it could get dangerous.
Yeah.
I'm
I
not
mean,
talking Skynet or whatever, but I'm talking like information can be good or information can be bad, as we know. And
I could
so,
see an application where I would have concerns as a worker. This thing's following me around all day. It's tracking how many at-risk behaviors I may do or perform, and then that information gets stored in a database somewhere. I leave the company. The following company requests for my at-risk behavior report from the open
your
AI.
profile, right?
Now, my profile, and now I lose
James,
out.
you'd never get hired. You'd
Yeah,
never
I'd
get
never
hired.
get hired. I'd never
Yeah.
get hired.
Same
Probably
here.
South and get hired. Right.
I might not get hired because not because of my hazardous behavior, but because of my mouth. So, yeah, I could see that. And that's privacy, right?
privacy is a big issue right now that nobody has resolved yet, because we could sit here all day finding examples of how privacy laws are going to conflict with some of this tech. I don't think it's been settled. I think, at least in the United States, some of it will be settled through court action. If I go to the extreme of saying, if you're an office worker and the business placed a camera right over your spot where you sit to watch everything you do, I'm pretty sure we would see litigation.
Yeah. No, the
So
problem with litigation though is litigation takes time, right? And I can see a catch me if you can kind of scenario where we can litigate all we want, but then we have to be judicious about how we go about finding people and finding them or putting them in jail or putting
Right.
whatever constraints
Uh,
on it.
A case in one circuit may not apply in another circuit. It's hard
Right.
to individualize each action, right?
Yeah.
And with all of the information security issues, we just had one the other day, in the connectivity realm. You read of data breaches almost daily from organizations. That is a concern as to how much of my personal information is an organization collecting, and what are the parameters of the security of that information.
Yeah, it's going to be years before a lot of this stuff gets shaken out. So, for example, we've already kind of been through a little mini session of this, right? So it's been a few years now since technologically you could allow cars to drive themselves. But from a regulatory legal perspective, in very few places in the United States is it legally allowed.
Mhm.
So
Doesn't mean it's not done, just means it's not legally allowed, right?
yes, exactly. So, but what I'm saying is, hypothetically speaking, if it was legal, how many drivers do you see would pull up with an Uber where there's a human behind the wheel? Uber and Lyft and those companies would figure out very quickly how to how to optimize their costing model by taking the
Right.
driver out of the mix. So as soon as that happens, that's what we're going to see. Ride sharing instantly go to driverless. But we're quite a few years into electric driverless cars, and the legality of it hasn't caught up. And this is going to
Yeah.
be the same with AI. We probably could have this conversation in 5 to 10 years, and they still won't be there.
Is
There
that
there
some of the
are
fear? Is that some of the fear of
Yeah.
workers, that my job as a paralegal, my job as a contract specialist, my job maybe even as a safety professional is going to be replaced by AI?
Yeah. It's a fair fear. So if you'd asked me this question about a year ago, most of the information out there said that, and most of the reports, tons of reports, even from the IMF, and said that 30 to 40% of global workers would be impacted. The latest data I read takes that number to 80%.
um,
Impacted means a lot of things. It doesn't mean lose your job. It does mean that you will be doing your job differently.
so let
And
me give you an example. I was going to bring this up just before James cut in there. Um, I have a former doctoral student who worked for a company that did deliveries, automatic deliveries with automatic delivery vans. They drove themselves, right?
yeah,
But they were in major cities. Okay. So we have no drivers, but in a warehouse in Houston, we have drivers and they're on simulators. And so when they get into the city and they get into some kind of thing where they can't make a decision, the driver in Houston in a warehouse sitting in a simulator does his job differently because he's actually going to take control of that vehicle in New Orleans
So like a drone.
by like a drone, and he's going to drive it through traffic as a human would drive it through traffic. It's like a simulator. It's, instead of driving, you're now doing a video game of a real life situation.
that is
Right. So
correct.
he's doing it differently. This job's not going away, but the job is being localized to Houston at that warehouse.
Yeah, I think from this revolution, nobody quite knows what the final impact on work is going to be. But if we take the Industrial Revolution, there are entire jobs that went away. Somebody used an example for me one day, which is um, when New York City was mostly horse and buggy, you had an army of people whose job it was to just keep the streets clean so the horses and the carriages could get through. But when it switched to cars, every one of those people lost their jobs. But when you look at
Became
the
mechanics.
numbers, exactly, all of a sudden mechanics and gas stations popped up. So you had a shift in work. It's the same story now. You'll see jobs disappear, like, for example, call center customer service. Most of those will disappear. right? And they'll be taken over by an AI. And I think most people today would be very surprised at how often they've called the customer service line and they were not speaking to a human, even though they thought they were.
Interesting. Interesting.
So that's
Well,
where
I'm telling you, we could talk about this all day. I actually think this is a two-part. Yeah, I'll confer with my partner here, but I think this is at least another episode. Fascinating stuff. I hope I'm asking some good questions. I know James is, but we could pick your brain forever. Unfortunately, we've got to wrap at about 45, 50 minutes because people get, a little bit low on attention span. But I would like to have you back, Alan.
happy to come back whenever you like, especially because at the speed that this is moving, we may have more topics to talk about,
Absolutely.
related to this. Because
Absolutely.
I think I have at least an aha wow moment at least once a month with this tech.
Okay, so you
So
know what? We want to be on that call list there. When you have the aha moment, I think James and I would like to know,
sure,
what is the aha? Because this is revolutionary and scary and all the things wrapped together.
I
Um,
agree. I
so
agree.
thank you for coming on our show. James, you want to take us out with what people need to do?
Sure. Thank you, Alan, for attending. Thank you for your service on the Strategic Advisory Board. Your
Absolutely.
knowledge is so cutting edge, and your delivery is such that it makes me a lot more comfortable with utilizing some of this technology in an effort to get workers home safe from high hazard jobs. Thank you also to our listeners that tune in. Every Tuesday around noon Central, an episode of the Risk Matrix is published on YouTube, Veriforce's YouTube channel, and on Spotify. So go over to the YouTube channel, go to Spotify, hit that subscribe button, smash that like button, join us in the conversation. Until next time, you guys keep bringing workers home safe from high hazard jobs.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide. Out.